Hi, I'm Jarrett Murphy from City Limits here in the City and State Video Studio, and I'm very happy to be joined by Rachel Fee, the Executive Director of the New York Housing Conference. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's always hard to say goodbye to a budget season because it's so much fun, but it is in the rearview mirror. What's your overall assessment of how housing issues fared in Albany?
Well, I've never heard anyone talk about the budget season as fun before. Interesting take on it. Housing actually we ended up with a decent budget for affordable housing, but given that there was $5.4 billion in bank settlement surplus and none of that went to affordable housing, it feels a little bit disappointing. And, we have a huge need in New York State. 1 in 3 New York City households pays more than half of their income on rent. We have 80,000 homeless statewide. So given the extent of our affordability crisis, we'd really like to see the state commit more.
And what would you have liked to have seen done with that set of money? How would you have used it for housing?
There's really a great set of housing finance programs that the state already administers. I mean, increasing the allocations for those programs would have been a great start, but there are many ways to address housing affordability and the foreclosure crisis. If we were given that $500 million we were looking for in bank settlement funds that came out of the mortgage foreclosure crisis that were directly related to mortgage fraud activities that came out of the settlements, I think it could have gone a long way to addressing affordability.
And that additional $500 million would have joined the money from the J.P. Morgan settlement
Right.
That was dedicated in the previous year, so it would have been $1 billion total. That was the idea, right?
Yeah, and that's really the scale of impact that we're looking for from New York State. And the J.P. Morgan funds were required to go to housing, and there's actually a great plan in place to go towards vulnerable populations, addressing homelessness and supportive housing. But again, given the extent of the crisis, we'd really like to see more from the state.
You call yourselves the New York housing crisis, and obviously that could mean state, it could mean city, it could mean both. One thing I wonder is, when people talk about affordable housing in Albany, does that seem like a New York City specific issue, or do places like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, can they relate? Is there a statewide consensus that the state needs to do more on affordable housing?
I think there is a statewide consensus. The issues, vary around the state. Of course, affordability is a real issue in New York City. Parts of Long Island and upstate counties are still really suffering from the foreclosure crisis. We have a need for supportive housing statewide, so housing for homeless people with disabilities. There's a host of issues. I mean, senior housing is a great issue statewide that we could really use better public policy in addressing the issue.
Supportive housing is an important thing to talk about. This was really the first year that advocates began aggressively seeking a New York 4 approach. I think the number they sought was 30,000 units of supportive housing in the city and 5,000 elsewhere in the state. There was some money in the budget dedicated to that. Have you gotten a sense yet of how many units that will allow us to do, and how that takes us from ending New York 3 to starting New York 4? Where are we on supportive housing?
So it's my understanding that about 5,000 units of supportive housing will be funded over 5 years, and that's going to be a statewide program. With 80,000 homeless statewide, it's not enough. So I think that we continue to push for a bigger agreement, a bigger 10-year agreement, and one that's really going to make an impact on homelessness.
Supportive housing occasionally raises some controversy in neighborhoods in New York City, people who suspect it's going to affect their quality of life as neighbors, affect their property value. Do you feel that the relative lack of action on supportive housing in the state, was that just because other priorities prevailed, or do you think that some of that sort of local NIMBY, for lack of another word, support has undercut affinity for supportive housing among legislators?
I think that the program is a strong program, and I think people understand it's cost effective. It makes more sense to invest in affordable housing than to keep people cycling in and out of shelters, especially for disabled homeless people, which supportive housing is for. So, I think really it's been a program that both the state legislature and the governor and the mayor of the city of New York are all behind. I think we just really have to get back and craft the right program, in a 10-year plan.
So moving to the city, there are a lot of issues at play here. The mayor's affordable housing plan continuing to roll out, and looking back to Albany for action on rent regs and on 421A. What is the Housing Conference hoping to see on 421A? What are you hoping to hear out of the city? What are you hoping to see from the state?
So the New York Housing Conference is a broad-based coalition. We've been around for 40 years, and really we support affordable housing policy and budget advocacy to foster the development of more affordable housing and the preservation of existing affordable housing. So for us, 421A, the extension of it to benefit affordable housing is important. We're waiting to see what's going to come out in terms of proposals for reform. And I think some of those programs will really take a look at the geography that requires an affordable component, maybe some tinkering with what percentage of goes to affordable, what area median incomes they serve, what kind of income levels for families. So those are some of the things we expect to be thinking about between now and June. And of course, there's also the renewal of the rent laws.
There's been some argument about, on one side, whether we should have 421A at all. On the other side, some worry that tinkering with it in any way might affect the ability of developers to participate in it. So do you think that you can tweak 421A and that it still will be an effective subsidy? Can you kind of open that hood and work on it without damaging the program irreparably?
I think it's important that when we're looking at a public subsidy that we're really extracting the most out of it, not just for the taxpayer, but in this case to develop affordable housing. So, we'll see what kind of proposals come out this spring. And we're hoping that it can be made more efficient, but we certainly are advocating for an extension of the program regardless.
So you mentioned rent regulations. Obviously those would expire June 15th unless they're extended. There, as always seems to be the case, are competing proposals to strengthen or, I guess, weaken it. Mm-hmm. There's also a school of thought that it's likely nothing's going to change. If you had to guess, what do you think we're going to see in terms of a renewal, any kind of reform? Do you think there'll be substantial changes?
It's really hard to say what's going to happen. I think it's going to be an interesting several weeks between now and the end of June when both 421A and the rent laws are decided. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen.
And obviously, just to kind of elevate the drama, as that discussion is going on in Albany, the Rent Guidelines Board in New York City will be considering the annual rise or lack of a rise in rents for rent-stabilized housing. Do you think that Mayor de Blasio risks losing the cooperation of developers and property owners in creating and preserving affordable housing if he pushes for a rent freeze again?
It's hard to say. I think he's been doing a really good job balancing the interests of both the tenant advocates and the developers. The affordable housing plan that the mayor released last year, I think showed that he can really tackle this issue head on. It's a robust plan, 200,000 units, a whole host of policy changes, improving not just the programs that help the city deliver on affordable housing, but also process efficiencies across the city. So I'm confident that we're going to come out with policy that's going to be better at the end of the day.
Well, let's hope so. Thanks very much, Rachel.
Thank you.